Wow, we didn't, ooh, that was loud. Just checking you're awake. Ah, now I understand why the previous speaker had it down here. Okay. Wow, we didn't think anybody would come. Thank you very much for all being here. Welcome Jesper. And thanks to everybody on the live stream. Hello, including the legal and PR departments from Google and Facebook. Welcome Jesper. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, thanks for coming everyone. It's good to be back in Perugia.
Great. Well, technically we have, first of all, can you hear me in the back okay? Yeah, okay, all right, I'll try and keep it that way. But if you can't, just like stand up and yell or something. We've got 25 minutes, which I think is probably not long enough. So I sort of mentioned that lightly to Chris, and he said that he'll schedule us so we can go over a bit. So we're going to try and do that. So we might go to 45 minutes. If we get really boring, don't worry, we won't feel hurt if you leave. And what we did is I posted on LinkedIn for some questions and sent it through some WhatsApp groups and some emails to people. So we're going to take those, but we definitely want to do audience questions as well. And I think the first thing we need to state is everything we say, well, everything I say is personal. I'm not a representative of Google anymore. And so please don't think this is Google speaking. And when you hear it, you're probably going to realize it's definitely not Google speaking. So just that disclaimer. I think you have a disclaimer too.
And the same is true for me. I do not work for Meta. I do not represent Meta by any means. This is personal opinion based on 25 years in the industry. And it might be interesting to you.
Yeah. Great. Let's kick into it. So when I originally conceived this session, we brainstormed titles like Behind the Scenes of Tech Companies' News Ecosystem, a conversation between two ex-tech company news executives, all this kind of stuff. And we settled on what went wrong between tech and news. And for full transparency, because I tend to try to be optimistic sometimes, I added, and did anything go right? Right, so we're going to try and have a rounded conversation about this whole space. And I know it's very fraught, but hopefully we can add some substance to the discussion, shall we say, rather than people just yelling at each other. Okay. Because in the end, we are two news executives who joined a tech company and basically came out the other end, if you know what I mean. So let's just do some intros to ground ourselves, and then we'll kick into it. Sound good? Great. Jesper, please introduce yourself.
Yes, so I'm Jesper Doub. I've spent my entire professional life in media, spanning across tech, editorial, business. I spent my time in different German media companies, such as Axel Springer, Dumont, Bauer Media, and before I joined Meta, my role was CEO for the TV and digital business at the Spiegel in Germany. And in this role, Meta invited us to these roundtables to talk about what we could do better, how we could partner. And I probably stood out because I constantly yelled at them. And at that time, Campbell Brown, who was heading the news team at Facebook at the time, came up to me and said, "You should really join us." I said, "That's a smart move to silence me." And I declined at first, but we kept talking over time, and they convinced me that they actually wanted to try and change something in the partnership with news. So I joined in 2018. It was really funny. It was a time where in that year, on January, Facebook introduced meaningful social interactions, and a lot of publishers' traffic dropped overnight. And the very day I signed my contract was when the big scandal of Cambridge Analytica broke. So I felt this feels like a great choice. But I had a great time. I learned a lot, and we'll talk about some of the things that we did. I was responsible for news partnerships when I started in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, with my team. And just a year before I stopped, or I'd rather say was stopped, I was responsible for international, which at Meta was Asia, Pacific, LATAM, and Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and the relationships with partners there.
Great, thank you. And me briefly, I started my career at Associated Press Television in London as part of the startup team, where I ended up moving into the newsroom and then went to the business side. I had a year in working for a media company in M&A that I don't like to talk about, and then moved to the BBC, where I was head of rights and development for BBC News before moving to Google. And at Google, I actually was, in 2010, I was the first news partnerships person outside the US. And they had one news partnerships person in the US. And I ended up building up 2 teams there. I was part of creating DNI, the Digital News Initiative, which became GNI, the Google News Initiative, and was involved in things like the Journalism Emergency Relief Fund, our innovation challenges. And I apologize, if I say I in any of this, there is no I. It was all done with a team, and a lot of the really good people who we're doing all that good stuff are still there, and no one ever does anything individually at a tech company anyhow. But by my count, I was involved in getting about close to $250 million of Google's money into the news ecosystem. So there we go. So that's us. Let's get to the questions. We had some great pre-submitted questions, including ones I wish I'd asked myself back in the day, to be frank. So everyone in the audience, please think about your questions. We're going to take the pre-submitted questions first, and then I'm going to throw to the audience. And I think for logistics, what I'll do is I'd actually primed a few people who'd sent me some questions to stand up, but I think for logistics and speed, I'm just going to say the question and who said it if they were comfortable with it, if that's okay. And don't worry, we're good. Okay. So the first question, the topics are the relationship between news and tech overall. Second one is basically hindsight, what would you have done differently? And the third is really AI and the future looking forward. So really simple, easy subjects, which we're going to kick into. So the first one on the relationship, and this came from Jonathan Haywood of the Public Interest News Foundation in the UK. Looking back, do you think the relationship between platforms and publishers has been too adversarial, transactional, and have we missed an opportunity for truly creative collaboration? Or is it too late? Nice, simple one to start. Jesper, over to you.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. And I think to answer that properly, you have to look at the timeline. So if you look at the relationship between publishers between 2012 and 2018, this was what we refer to as the golden times, because it opened up for publishers, it was a new platform, people were curious, and it actually generated decent amount of traffic for free to the websites. There was some up and downs, and obviously not everything went as smoothly every day. There were some hiccups, there were discussions, but overall, it felt like a pretty good balanced deal. Like the publishers were good to have traffic, Facebook had interesting content on the site, people seemed to like it, engage with it. It served the purposes that Facebook had at the time, publishers got their share, so all of that seemed to be okay. Publishers obviously were smart because there was always a drive to, well, how can we improve this even more? And if you remember that, 2016, 17, you started to get these, you have to read these 5 things, the third one made me cry, where it started to generate a lot of clickbait, and it worked like crazy. But what Facebook found out at the time was that it does not necessarily serve what the user wants and what made users happy. So when I was a publisher at that time, I was one of the few who obviously got a call 24 hours ahead to say, we're changing something. It's like, what do you mean you're changing something? Yeah, we were introducing meaningful social interactions. So, well, that sounds good, great. Yeah, but you might be affected. Like how? Well, I can't tell you. Next day, we woke up, and a lot of publishers around the world had seen their traffic drop overnight because Facebook had regulated for something in their own interest. And that was something where, at least as I perceived it, pretty much the whole industry were up in arms and say, how can you do this? We relied on this, we hired teams, our business plans are in jeopardy, we need you to compensate us for this, and all these things, and obviously Facebook would not. And that was the beginning of a lot of changes if you look back. The next thing was video. Video is a hot thing don't talk about Facebook Live, but video, and they came and said, well, you should produce 3-minute video. That is what we really want, that is what we're going to concentrate on. I said, hey, we're a news organization. Have you tried to build a 3-minute video on a news topic? It's hard. We're not prepared to do that. Well, that's a shame because we're going to prioritize that. So we started hustling, some of us got some money, played around with it, and it was just a constant iteration of changes. And this is where the fundamental difference between the industry and a platform like Facebook or Instagram or any other platform, Google presumably as well, was very clear that it is about speed. These organizations, news publishing and tech, work at so different speeds when it comes to decision-making, changes, adapting, being satisfied with the result. There's a saying in Facebook, and I think many other companies, done is better than perfect. That is very often not an option in journalism. But for tech it was. And so they went away and parted ways. Facebook would obviously, because it's their company, optimize for their outcome. And it kind of is at that point where I personally feel that the whole thing started to tilt, because it was, hey, this is not fair anymore. You're still getting value from our content, but it feels like you're playing us every 6 weeks and changing course. They didn't do that deliberately to annoy the industry. They were just not focusing on the industry because it was one of the many things that they did and had as content. So I think at that moment, everyone started to blame the other based on their own worldviews. And instead of having a candid conversation about, hey, this doesn't work for us, what can we do? Everyone started blaming each other. And then it came down from becoming a partnership into a pure business discussion. And we see the outcome of this today. Is it too late? Google is still engaged in things. They're here. They're still sponsoring. We were one of the main sponsors as well a couple of years ago. Hurts to say that Meta is not anymore. I'm here enjoying Perugia as a private person. But I would, if I had to bet, I would say, for now, Meta has left the building. There's nothing to repair.
That's terrifying and a statement of the blindingly obvious, too, just from my perspective. But just to follow up, Charlie Beckett of the LSE in the UK had a specific question for you, and it was, what value was news media to platforms in the past, and what value could it be in the future? Or someone anonymously put it even more starkly when they said, publishers almost certainly overestimated the importance of news content to tech platforms. From the perspective of the platform, were publishers ever more than an irritant to be held at bay by whatever means necessary? And I'm quoting somebody else.
Me again? Thank you.
The value.
The value. Well, I don't know if you were at the session this morning where it was about the price for, fair price for news. And the number that was mentioned was research that said $12 billion for the US only. And the answer from a platform's perspective is the value is none. It actually is negative. It's a cost. And that hurts to say if you're in news and if you spend your life in news. And obviously the answer is way more complicated than that, because it depends on how you measure this. And this is almost a religious discussion, and I've been in these discussions. And you can come up with all sorts of reasonings that seem to make sense, and it's always based on where you come from. Like if you spend your life in news, you feel, I hope, still, that we need journalism in our lives. We need journalism to sustain democracy and have an open, informed world. That is a value in itself, and that is a civic discourse that I hope never stops. We need to fight for this. But through the way that the whole thing was approached by demanding money, and in the eyes of an exec at Facebook, crazy money, the whole thing never got the chance to be talked about as a, what is your obligation as a player in a market when you reach so many people? Do you have a civic duty as a platform to provide access to information Look at the Philippines, where Facebook is pretty much the only way to get information from outside. If you cut out news out of that situation, what does that do to a market like the Philippines? But the whole discussion was directly turned into business. And the way that Facebook went about this, I think, is a way you can do this. They said, well, if you want to measure the value, take it away and see what happens. And they did. They did in Canada. They still do it today. And this is public information. Nothing happened. They took down every bit of news in Canada. Nothing happened. Some even say that the business metrics went up. That kills me. But if that's the truth, it shows that trying to force a platform like Facebook, I think the situation with Google is slightly different simply because of the business model. If you're a publisher, you're the one putting your stuff up there. If you don't like the outcome or your result, don't put it up there. Facebook is in position to say, we're not doing anything. We're not scraping, we're not collecting. If you don't think this is a fair deal, just don't do it. And in the markets where they say, well, you know what, we didn't ask you to put it up. You put it up, that's great, that works for us. But if you now want us to pay, in Facebook's eyes, silly money, we just want to say no. And if the only way of getting around this is to walk away, I'd say they walk away. They did this in Canada. They have now announced in Australia that they're not going to extend the deals, I've heard. And my personal prediction would be that wherever they will face this, they will just walk away from the problem. Personally, I do not think that this will solve the problem, and it might come back and bite them at some point, because we cannot get around this civic conversation that needs to happen. Well, the question is when and how does that happen?
Yeah, I think from my experience about the value of news, I think that it's very, very hard to value it. And I've been involved in things on the Google side, and it is hard. And it's also trying to realize it from the long-term impact is close to impossible, nobody knows. But the one thing that I do know is that the value that the publishing ecosystem, and particularly some of the activists in it, put it at, and any kind of reasonable view of it, is far away. I mean, you can just get into the detail of the methodology of some of the stuff that's been published, right? I wish it were true, I really do, because if it were true, it would have been an entirely different world. But as somebody very smart said, if you force a company to pay for something that they don't want or value, they're just going to take less of it, right? That's how it went. But let's go back to the question, and there was a lot of questions in this space, and thank you to everybody who submitted the questions. Has it become too adversarial? Fuck yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. I mean, Jesus Christ, right? Not only is it too adversarial, it's also too transactional, it's also too almost religious, right? People are in these camps that they can't talk to each other, right? And when they talk at each other, right? And by the way, if you thought I was in a camp and talking at you, I apologize. I really thought I was trying, and obviously didn't do so great, but there you go. But I think the other thing, in terms of the dynamic that really frustrated me, is that it became viewed by a lot of people, I think on the publishing side, frankly, as zero-sum, right? Either, and I'll only speak for Google, because there's some interesting things that you said about Facebook that like Google would never do, right? So Google would never tell anybody, we're about to make an algorithm change, because very simply, they would have to tell everybody, so they tell nobody beforehand, right? That's just simple. And man, I wish Google was fast about certain things. It's too fast on certain things and really slow on other things. And then you get that, hurry up to go slow. We used to get our annual budgets on a good year that started in January. On a good year, we get it in February. On an average year, we get it in March. Anyhow, that's going to get me in trouble. But going back to the zero sum, I think this is a really important dynamic. I don't think from my perspective, I ever thought it as zero-sum. A lot of people on the publishing side thought it as zero-sum. I'll tell you who really thought it was zero-sum. It's the Axel Springers and the News Corps of the world. But here's the thing. Their zero-sum is not about the entire publishing ecosystem. Their zero-sum is about them, right? They like to dress themselves up in the mantle of journalism and the ecosystem, and you're doing all of this. They don't care about you. They care about them. And once they get what they want, they're out, right? And I think at the heart of this worry or concern or whatever was this whole thing about the revenue, right? And I had a conversation with somebody who should remain nameless in the bar, and she's the CEO of a publisher in the Nordics, and she said, these guys keep saying, she was naming somebody specifically on the publishing side, that Google and Facebook stole our ad revenue, right? She said this, they didn't steal the ad revenue, right? They made a better product, right? And also, I think the other thing is when you look at digital advertising, Google's money's in search advertising, which is different from brand advertising. So there's a whole lot of detail, kind of boring stuff that nobody gets into because it's detailed and boring, but it's actually important about how digital advertising works, and no one wants to have that conversation, right? So I think a lot of this was based on that false assumption or assertion, and then things went from there, right? And it's fair to say they didn't go well from there, right? But that may be different because the majority of Google's money comes from search advertising, which is different from brand advertising. In brand advertising, Google's an ad tech supplier. Might be different from Facebook's perspective because you guys were always in brand. So do you want to touch on that from, did Facebook steal the newspaper's advertising brand revenue?
Well, I think that was a thing that I didn't even agree with when being a publisher. I think that is just a cheap excuse for having been sleeping in class. The publishers had a huge advantage in their traditional business. They would know their subscribers, they would know their advertisers, they would know their local cities, their structures, they would have all sorts of information. And I was in a room at a publisher that I won't name in probably around 2010, where we had a discussion whether we should invest in building up a data set or a database with all our print subscribers, with all our registered online users, to see if we could build profiles of some sort. We were really good at retention of subscribers at that time. We were pretty sophisticated at data mining. And the idea was, let's take this one step further. Let's build profiles from our users, subscribers, and see if we can use that in the future to either understand which content to serve or which ads to sell. That was 2010. That was when Mark still was running around the world introducing Facebook. There was no ad business at Facebook at that time. And guess what? The answer was no. We don't need that. We know how our business is done. That's been the same for ages now. Why would we start building silly profiles? Have you thought about data protection? That's really complicated. Let's spend that money elsewhere. Let's buy a new printing machine. The industry has missed that opportunity while watching on, and Google, Facebook, others built a way more sophisticated ad offering to the media industry, media meaning advertising, over time, and we're probably now at a point where it's really hard to get behind that, given the investments that would take. But so they never stole it, because the newspapers gladly took the ads when they had a monopoly.
Here's a good question that came in, so I'm going to put it to you. Did you, at Facebook, though you're not a representative of Facebook, blah, 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 you all get that caveat, did Facebook know publishers' audiences better than the publishers? Because the quick answer from the Google side is no, because all Google needed for its search advertising was the query, right? So.
No. It was always assumed.
Come on.
No, it was always, we had a great partner in the UK who would call us and said, hey guys, our traffic has dropped by 6.78% since last Tuesday, 11:15. What have you done? And we were, what? We couldn't even see that in our systems. And that was simply because, as a good newsroom, you would obsess with your data and make sure you understand where it comes from and what works and what doesn't. And we put it to our engineers and say, might be one of these 90 tests running that affects them. Have them look over 3 months and see if it comes back. Because at Facebook, nobody ever looked at it on a daily basis or hourly basis down to a specific account. It's a huge scale business. And these things just happen on the sideline. Could have thousands of reasons. And sometimes partners wouldn't believe us. We said, we don't know. Let's see and wait what comes up. Sometimes there actually might have been a bug, which we found. Very often not, and it came back for as equally unknown reasons. Simply because no one was sitting there. We had a joke, Sarah, one on my team always said, yeah, that's me with my remote. The big red knob is for turning down traffic, and the green one is for interactions. But none of that happened, no. I would say CrowdTangle was probably the best tool, now unfortunately deprecated, which I find is a shame, to understand what was going on the platform for newsrooms. But we ourselves didn't have that magic radar. I wish we had.
Deviating from our agreed group because I'm realizing I'm being terrible at time management. So I'm going to skip ahead to the hindsight stuff. And in terms of what either of us would have done differently, and Stili Karalambus, the CEO of the Daily Maverick, asked, if you could go back in time and were awarded the same 10-year budget for news support, how differently would you allocate it, if at all? Thank you, Stili. And there was lots of variants of this, but I think that was really well worded. Oh man, I feel like I need a drink to take care of this one. So I think the first thing I wish I had realized was this entire dynamic was about power. The battlefield was money, but it was about power, and it was about exertion of power. And the large publishers, like the News Corps and the Axel Springers, they used their power really well. They had the power and they used their power, right? And this is why it blows my mind when, as I heard this morning, people go, oh, Google's lobbying efforts are so great and so powerful and they've had all these achievements. If you're inside of Google, you just feel like you're losing, and nobody's hearing your argument, right? So I think there's about power. It's about power. So what would I have done differently? I'll tell you what my heart would have done, and then I'll give you what my head would have said to my heart. My heart would have said, okay, let's take that budget, let's go to the small, independent, digital first, the natives, the ones who understand it, and let's work with them, let's build on it. Because actually the principle of what we built DNI on was the argument that we had internally, right? I said this in a discussion with Sundar, which was, look, because what happened was that Mountain View was confused when the first start of regulation came around. They were like, wait, why? Why are they're asking for a link tax, but they get search traffic, and then we help them with other things? Why are they asking for this? It doesn't make any sense. And so a bunch of us said, look, the news industry is struggling with a structural change to their business model caused by the internet, okay? It's not caused by one company or even two companies. It's a structural change. But news is important. So let's work with news organization on the underlying structures, right? And that's why we did about product training and research and the innovation fund. That's what I would have, my heart would have said. My head tells me where I sit here, it would have made no freaking difference if we'd done that. And, oh wow, are we really, oh my God, are you kidding me? Oh, I'm so sorry, I thought we had longer. So we will, okay, sorry, I thought we agreed longer, but that's fine. So let's do this. Let's throw out the rest of the stuff,
Yeah.
and let's get some audience questions in. Right, audience questions, forget it. And by the way, we will be around and probably in the bar at the Brufani to keep this conversation going if I still have any friends left in the audience. Natalia.
Thank you, Natalia Anslava from Coda Story. You know, I think we need to zoom out a little bit to see a big elephant in the room here. Because, Jesper, Madhav, I like you both. We've had really great conversations. But we need to address the fact that while you were serving Prosecco to journalism at Perugia Festival, the companies you were representing were aiding genocides and assisting authoritarians around the world in squashing the very basic rights that are necessary for this profession to exist. And do you regret that? And if you want examples, we can.
Could you give me an example? Because
Sure.
I don't accept that. At least
Sure, Myanmar is one example. Another example is when opposition in Russia, Alexei Navalny, came up with a way of using Silicon Valley technology in order to stand up to the Kremlin's regime. Google and Apple pulled his app from their stores. They sided with Putin. There are so many other examples. Many of them are on our site. Can we even talk about the relationship between platforms and journalism without that big picture? Because that is the ultimate underlying structure here.
That is a fantastic question. And I think you should have this discussion, because what you do, if you're going to pull out that picture, you got to bring governments into that picture. You do. And the issue is, if you are a company, let me finish. We can have the conversation at the bar too, right? Don't worry, we're friends. And I hope we will stay friends. But here's the thing, the tech companies they work in these countries. A lot of us don't like the governments in those countries, but they have to obey the laws of those countries. And so they do as much as they can and obey until it gets to a line. And then, if I may, let me just finish, Natalia. And then if it goes beyond that, then they take action, like Google did in China by pulling out of China and not taking the product in China, right? It's amazing to me when it comes to Russia that Putin has not shut down YouTube, because YouTube is one of the only ways to get independent information. So, and by the way, Myanmar and Facebook is a completely different thing, right? And I don't want to throw Jesper under the bus, because I think that was approached in a completely different way, and that was more negligence than having to navigate difficult things. Because I guess what you would prefer that Google pulled out, and then it would pull YouTube out, and then you've got a whole series of secondary consequences. But tell me, and look,
We understand that the interests of the companies, the government. I'm not asking you about regulation or the government.
So,
the question is whether, like, you look at this with that, whether this is part of the hindsight.
I don't.
Sorry, you can go on until
it's cool.
half past 1.
Okay.
You can go on.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So, do I regret it? No. Do I wish things would be different? And do I know in my heart that if certain things had been different, that we would be in a better world? I don't have that confidence to be able to say that. But personally, for what I did, I think I tried my best, right? Do I wish things had gone differently? Fuck yeah. But there's also a lot of individuals still at these companies trying to do their best. So, and we'll keep going.
Yes, I'm going to pick up on the situation of Myanmar, actually, because I was based there for worked on Myanmar, but in Myanmar for 7 years, 9 years working on Myanmar, and very much actually working to document a lot of what Facebook, but also YouTube was doing. And I just want to ask, like, to what extent have you been looking at the money that you're actually putting into this country as well? Because when we look at the situation of the Rohingya and what happened in 2017, actually, Facebook came in with instant article in 2016, in April of 2016, and that is the moment the entire information ecosystem shifted. So there's big questions there as well, in terms of like what influence you're having in terms of who do you redistribute money to. Because when we talk to the media in Myanmar, they barely make $100 from your companies, right? None of them is able to even pay one staff out of the money that they're getting through the ad revenue. Their content, however, is getting stolen from YouTube, stolen from Facebook, reproduced, and a lot of other grifters from all around the world are making money off of their content. So my question is, what about that element as well? Like currently, we estimate that you redistribute about $20 billion a year in ad revenue sharing programs. Where is that money going? And what's happening with that? Because when you look at really what happened in the context of the genocide in Myanmar, a ton of the anti-Rohingya content was coming from an anonymous clickbait site, which emerged in April, May, June of 2016, literally as Facebook came in with instant article. So there's a big question there as well.
Well, I think that's typically one for me. Caveat, I joined Facebook in 2018. That is not, excuse me, again, I'm not talking for Facebook. From what I've learned and understood is that Facebook has admitted that it had not paid enough attention, had tried to resolve that. But the way that these things run when you look at how our products introduced into a market is not primarily where do we put some money. That's not how this works. It's a functionality that says, is there user interest in a market? Do we think this will have value for the product, for example, Facebook or any other app? And then the product is shipped, a team on the ground or from remote will encourage partners to try to use it, see it, if it generates value. I'm actually not well informed enough to talk about the bid with instant articles, but I would love to catch up with you later to better understand the thing.
But just to add to that, saying you came and pitched instant article in Myanmar 3 months before launching it, literally an hour after having briefed that the country was headed for genocide. Just so that's clear.
Maria.
Hi. Jesper, this is for you.
Yes.
Since you mentioned the Philippines, I think 2 points you made I would challenge, right? The first is you said publishers didn't move into data, didn't move into advertising. But I would submit that advertising, the way publishers do it, still remains relatively ethical until we use third-party things. But what Facebook, what the big tech companies did, is actually micro-targeting in a way that would be unethical for us to build, one. And then the second one, let me directly address the Philippines. Facebook wasn't the only way people get news in the Philippines, right? And my company, Rappler, actually helped spread Facebook in the Philippines. I drank the Kool-Aid, kind of like you, but the harms were so severe. So I guess that's a similar question to Natalia, and we don't want to be adversarial, but we would like to see, I personally would like to see an acknowledgement of what mistakes were made and ethical boundaries and what can change.
Thank you, Maria. And yes, first of all, of course, publishers have found their way on how to do advertising. They still do today. My point was more that publishers had a very early advantage that they didn't leverage to maybe even have prevented from platforms coming up with that. And yes, there are ethical questions, data protection. Is it okay to profile people without knowing, selling ads against that? I personally think that it is good that there's regulation in place in some areas of the world that more and more prevents these things. Will it stop the success of targeted advertising? I highly doubt that. If you see what AI does today in absence of detailed data, the successes are pretty, well, wherever you stand, impressive or concerning. Because you can really work with a lack of data in these things. Acknowledgement of things that have gone wrong in all of these things, whether I was there or not. Believe me, if you sit inside an organization that works globally, thousands of people that work on very different things, very different topics, sometimes in regions that you currently are not working on because you're concentrating on ourselves, if something goes wrong, I personally felt bad about this. I wish I could have changed something. I could not. I tried where my team could make an impact. We worked together as a team. I think not all of it is a regret. I think we helped to do a lot of things, but there are only so much you can do as an organization, And that means specifically for my news team, we had great things we could do. We wish we could have done more. I think that's fair to say for pretty much all of my team members. We're proud of the things that we could help with. Does that mean that we found everything else that happened is just okay and the price you have to pay? Personally, absolutely not.
Yeah, just a quick build on that. And the thing that worries me is that it's become so adversarial that I think the tech companies are incredibly defensive, right? And I think what has happened is we missed an opportunity when we let the Springers and the News Corps get regulation in there, and then news became a problem, right? And what that meant is that I think there was a moment, at least from the Google side, where we were doing cool stuff, right? And there was, I think it was, probably 14 to 16 was the best time. But now, because of what's going on, what I observe is the tech companies are trying to figure out what is the minimum they have to do. And in some cases, sorry, I shouldn't point to you for Facebook, but imagine I was pointing to a picture of Mark Zuckerberg. They're going to do 0, right? And the consequence of that, I don't know what it is, but shit, man, it doesn't feel good to me, right? That's not, but it's because of so many of these other different factors. And the other thing to acknowledge, and I know I got a dog in this fight, but there are a lot of good people at these tech companies. And there's a lot of people that go out there and just very easily demonize the entirety of it. And that doesn't actually help the good people who are trying to go, hey, man, we should have done more here, we should be doing more there. And by the way, if you have won a Nobel Prize in a Peace Prize, you get to ask as many questions as you want.
Actually, I guess let's take it out from publishers versus tech. Right? I think what happened, though, is the impact of the lawlessness, because tech took advantage of the lack of laws in ways that journalists did not. But we continued doing our jobs. So I guess the question is, and you were right, it's going to get worse because generative AI is going to make it worse, and there's still no laws that are effective. But the question still is, why is there no one in the companies that are looking at the impact on societies, on democracies, on people? The conflicts that we're involved in right now are made worse by the very things that connect us, your ex-employers. And I'll leave it at that, leave it to someone else.
But I think, at least I'll say this, there are definitely people who think about that at Google and think about it deeply and analyze it, right? And just because it doesn't get surfaced on the outside doesn't mean that people don't care. But often, when they do try, they get their heads cut off, right? Right? And you're not going to see a Google executive who's going to take an open AMA, apart from me when I was an idiot and did it. But so again, that's the adversarial nature. But I'll stop there. We should keep going. Ask other questions.
Sorry, I have a question.
No one's asked an AI question. I had an entire section on AI. Somebody asked me that.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Forgive me.
So my question is, it has been proven that giant tech companies have been over-moderating Arabic content and under-moderating Hebrew content, and I'm talking in the context of the genocide going on in Gaza. Misinformation, disinformation have been spreading in Hebrew, while journalists who have been trying to convey actually what's happening to civilians in Gaza, if you want, the DOI list that Meta hasn't disclosed yet, it says that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
I'm sorry, it's very echoey up here. Could you mind moving the mic back a little bit?
Course.
I apologize. I'm not catching 100% what you're saying, and I want to hear that.
What I was saying is that, we can take an example, the story of the false 40 beheaded Israeli babies that was spread in international newspapers and on social media and was later removed as if nothing happened without a single apology. While if I want to talk about myself, I posted about a white phosphorus bomb that landed in my family's village. It was removed after 1 hour. While a false story could spread for days and months and it wouldn't be removed. This has been fueling the Arabophobia, the Islamophobia. It has been and I know you're not representing Meta here, but these policies were not specifically made to address like the post-October 7 events. They have been there since forever. They appeared during the Sheikh Jarrah uprising in 2021. And I am asking you, why is this happening? Because we have been reaching out, we have been asking, but we don't get answers. And I think it is our right to get answers on why this is happening to the people in Palestine. I come from Lebanon, a country bordering Palestine. As we speak now, my village is under attack by Israeli forces. We have been like deprived from our right to go to our lands or take care of our lands. I want to ask, why is this happening? Why are these policies like have been put in place? I myself know the answer. I know that Meta relies on automated content moderation. I know it is understaffed. I know, like, I don't want to say they don't care actually about our cultural context, about the thousands of dialects we speak in our region, but we just want to hear the answer from you, from the people who are in power in those companies. Why is this happening to us? Why are we being oppressed like on the ground and online? Why is this cyber war targeting us since years?
Well, obviously, I cannot answer that for Meta because I'm not working there, and I'm not in a position to comment for Meta on this. What I can say from other incidents around the world, because you will have these conflicts around content being taken down, which should not have been taken down, content not being taken down fast enough or not widely enough because the spreading is actually moving faster than the removal. When something happens that actually has severe consequences, like a conflict we see at the moment, which is highly complex, has cultural roots, a lot of history. What I know from when I worked there was that there were teams put together who really try to find fast solutions, but it is, due to the scale, enormously complex, and at the same time, it is a very delicate balance that you have to take, because as you can imagine, if I would ask someone from Israel about the same situation, they would have a very different view on things and reasons and so on and so forth. Not saying that anyone is right or wrong, but it's incredibly complex. So as much as I would love to give you a satisfying answer, I can't, and I definitely cannot say anything on the recent conflict, but just acknowledging that this is complex.
I agree, but I'm sorry, I know other people want to ask, but just to follow up on this, my question is based on research that have been like published after the October 7th that proved that Arabic content has been like very over-moderated, while Hebrew content, like it was almost like not moderated. This is the basis of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure Jesper can ask because that's a question for Facebook, I'm afraid. And I'm also, I just want to acknowledge, I'm very sorry.
Google also like turned off its maps, so people like paramedics couldn't reach the wounded or so you have your own share also.
I just want to also acknowledge, I'm sorry of everything that's going on and going through that. And I'm sorry to cut you short. I think we should ask a few other questions, okay?
Sorry. From now, I'm here. From now, who has other questions can make to the speakers inside, ok? Chi da ora avesse altre domande lo potrebbe fare.
Sorry, I thought we had 5 minutes left. So can I just finish in the finish? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll take this. So I just want to look to the future. And if you want to get our views on AI and what to do and what's going on, come find us. But I think that I would say very quickly on that, from my observation, that what's going around with AI, the LLMs, it's about the detail. A friend of mine, ex-colleague, wrote an op-ed on the Washington Post, Jim Albrecht, go find it. I think it's a very good starting point about the differences between training data, between grounding data, then you got to think about real-time data, and actually where you should be thinking as a publisher, what is going to be more successful. And I think I'd like to We didn't even get to what went right, so I think we may have answered that question. But in terms of the future, let's ask the last question, which I think is just the kind of main subject. Someone asked, and I like the phrasing, what is your top advice to the platforms, the news publishers, and regulators? We okay for that to be the ending question, and then you can harangue us afterwards? All right, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it one by one. So let's do platforms, you, then me, and then we'll do publishers, you, then me, okay?
Platforms acknowledge that not everything in the world moves at the same speed you are, and that you have a responsibility in this world when you reach so many people, whether you like it or not. My next advice would be enter into discussions open-armed, try to understand your partners or your opponents, and try to figure out how to work this instead of ignoring or hoping for things to go away. And the third is probably listen to the experts that you've hired.
I'm going to look into the camera because I have a feeling that if I'm talking to the platforms, I'm going to be talking to somebody who's either on the live stream or on demand. So I would say, number one, realize that news is more important to society than it is to you. So if you want to play a part in society, stay committed to news, or even come back, right? These are societal issues that you play a big part on. I think the other one is on the regulation. Realize this is about power, right? And that buying off publishers is not going to solve the problem, it's going to make it worse. And don't think of news as a problem, right? And finally, think about the underlying reasons for that regulation and why they're all asking for money. It's about the structural elements, and work on the structural elements on the product side. Yeah, okay. Sorry, diatribe over. And let's move on to, this is going to be fun. Publishers.
Publishers?
Oh, no, let's finish with publishers. Let's go with regulators.
Regulators, my advice to regulators would be regulate the what and not the how. You always fail in setting guardrails, setting examples on how to do what, and the ones that you regulate will find a way around it. Regulate what you want the outcome to be, and then discuss the way how to get there. Secondly, really understand the topic that you're regulating in depth, or don't regulate. And third, don't misuse it for party politics.
My 3 ones very quickly are, don't kowtow to Axel Springer and News Corps, and start by enunciating the problem that you're trying to solve before you jump to the solution. And focus on the entirety of the news ecosystem, but from the bottom up, not from the top down. And publishers.
Publishers, first advice, don't wait for some magic to happen. Don't wait for someone around the corner to be the one who pays you next. They're not coming. Second, cooperate. Work together. Your competitor is not the next publisher. It's the others. And you can win so much by working together, much more than you do today. And the third one, do your homework. Figure out what someone in this world needs that you can offer that is worth their time and money. And don't try to just extend old models that people want less and less.
Publishers, number 1, don't kowtow to News Corps and Axel Springer. And actually what I mean by that is don't try to grab on their coattails and hope that you benefit while they take the majority of everything. There's a reason that, investigative journalists found out that the, European Copyright Directive, the first drafts actually came from Axel Springer, right? 2, to his point, work together as a collective, and even with technology companies, it's not a zero-sum game. I think particularly in the AI world, there is a lot better to be together, right? And what you're seeing is the big guys do their deals and getting out, and then everybody else is left. Intellectually, I have a thought about like a collective system for LLMs. If you're interested in that, let me know afterwards. And the other one, don't focus on the short term. Don't focus on the short term. I know it's really tough. I know it is really tough. But focus on sustainability and working for the benefits of that. Think about it in the long term. What can you do now to keep going in the long term rather than just go quarter to quarter, right? And I know it's bloody difficult, but you got to keep that in mind, because sometimes you do the right thing in the short term and you're screwing yourself in the long term. And with that, I got to close. Thank you very much. We emptied half the room, so it couldn't have been that good, but thank you.
Thanks for coming.